Can everybody hear me with this? Great. This is a microphone, and you will be using it for the Q&A. So in the Q&A, you might have to meet me halfway because a lot of you are sitting way up high. So I do welcome you to move forward. This is like a college lecture hall, so it's not a very intimate setting. So hopefully we can make it a very welcoming and fun time for you all. So I am Marge Schaefer. I represent the planning committee for this conference, and I just want to begin by sharing some guidelines with you. And I'm so glad that you're here. First of all, this session is being audio recorded, so just so you know that when you ask your questions. And we do ask everyone to listen with an open mind because we're all here to learn something new and maybe something we already know that we need to be reminded of. The presenter, who is Sherri M. Herman, would like you to wait with questions for the Q&A session. We'll stop at about 2:15. So you'll have time to ask questions. She may have some responses to ask for during the presentation. At the beginning, limit yourself to one question until everybody's had a chance, and then if we have extra time, you can ask another question. So make sure you safeguard any personal information and take that learning with you. We also know that sometimes subjects can be sensitive, so if you feel like you're having a response and need to check in with somebody, we do have someone at the information table in the atrium that can then respond to your questions. So I am going to begin with an introduction to our speaker. Sherri M. Herman is talking about the heart of interconnection, how to break free from loneliness and feel connected. Sherri is a licensed clinical psychologist. She's a coach, she's a speaker with almost 15 years of experience in mental health. She specializes in connection and loneliness. She integrates her psychological research, neuroscience, mindfulness, and spirituality to promote emotional well-being. She draws from her own journey of overcoming loneliness and empowers us. She empowers individuals to cultivate interconnection, leading to deeper meaning and fulfillment in their lives. She's served as clinical director and psychotherapist at Mount Olivet Counseling Service, as well as psychotherapy and leadership at Westminster Counseling Center. Lots of experience. She's positively impacted and continues to serve hundreds of lives through those kinds of experiences. Psychotherapy, counseling, support groups, adult education workshops, retreats, coaching, and providing engaging talks on overcoming loneliness. I heard Sherri speak this past year at a group for Mental Health Connect, and I found it to be very inspiring and meaningful. So let's welcome Sherri.
Thank you, Marge, and thank you so much, everybody, for being here and choosing to spend your time here with a topic that's not the most fun topic, so thanks for being brave and courageous and stepping into this room together. I hope that you'll walk away feeling a little bit more connected than you did when you arrived. This talk was really born out of my experience as a clinical counselor over the past nearly 15 years and learning more about the epidemic of loneliness that we are in. And I was noticing that there's a lot that is being addressed for loneliness, but there's some gaps. And in some of those gaps are what I do. And so I want to teach folks about that. So first, I want to ask you, do you ever feel lonely in a crowded room? Has anybody ever experienced that before? I have. Have you ever experienced loneliness after you've just spent a bunch of time with people that you love or feeling really connected? I have. It's kind of confusing. It's like, I just had a wonderful time. Now I'm back home and I feel lonely again. Or do you feel lonely even though you live with other people? We often think that those who live alone are the loneliest. However, that is not always the case. It is also many times the case that people who live with others or with a spouse feel deeply lonely because they're not connecting. So a little bit of background on me. It was the summer of 2015, and my then husband and I, we were just separated, and we were on the road to divorce. And we had just moved into our own separate apartments, sharing custody of our then 3-year-old son. And part of that initiating that separation was I was deeply unhappy, deeply lonely, and hurting a lot in our marriage. Looking back now, I can see, both just from my own personal experience and being a clinical counselor, I can see that there were a lot of problems in that marriage, objectively, that I do believe divorce was the best intervention for our situation. However, looking back, I can see that after we separated, I had this idea that if I just got out of this really unhappy situation, this horrible relationship, well then, I'll be good. I'll be happy, right? Just get out of this boat. I'll be on my own and I'll be good. But that is not what happened. I got out of that boat and I got into, I would say, a worse boat. And as it turns out, ending the marriage did not lead to the happiness and fulfillment that I thought it would. And has that ever happened to you where, you're in a situation that's not so good and you think, if I just can get out of this situation, I'll be fine. And you get out of the situation and it's like, shoot, that wasn't it. I'm actually still just as miserable as I was before. And that was very much the case for me, although I didn't exactly know why. So there I was in my apartment, my very bare apartment, alone on August 8th, 2015, and literally looking like this, fetal position on the floor, just sobbing, the loneliest I'd ever been, feeling incredibly depressed. Loneliness isn't a diagnosis, right? It's a feeling, but it can sure lead to depression. It can be intermingled with grief, despair. It, lives with a lot of other mental health issues. And so by this point, I was even a trained therapist. I was working clinically at this point. And so there I was in my deepest suffering, and I thought, well, like any good, self-respecting, well-trained therapist would do, I hopped back into a new relationship. I thought, I just need to find the right person, the right person that's going to meet my needs, they're going to make me feel loved, and then I won't feel lonely and sad anymore. So I had all the hope and delusion that another person was going to solve my loneliness, this time for good. And of course, it was only a matter of time before that relationship looked like a desolate landscape of death once again. And so, once again, I take that experience and, well, there are probably some things I can learn from this. I need to set certain boundaries. I need to be a little bit more aware of this or that. And so then I thought, okay, I know what I really need to do this time. I need to go back and find somebody different that's going to fit the bill for me. I'm going to really get it this time. But of course, okay, so we're back here. Sometimes I'm a quick learner and sometimes I'm kind of a slow learner. And I will say, if you have an experience of, if there's any generational trauma in your background, some things can be just a little bit slow to learn, like relationship issues. So it was this a few more times until I finally hit an emotional bottom and I thought something has to change, because that wasn't just my first divorce, that was my second divorce. Okay? And I thought, I'm a common denominator here. Not that the people I was with were perfect and any more healthy, but there's something happening in here that needs to change. So fast forward a decade, a tremendous amount of therapy, spiritual direction, 12-step work, prayer, meditation, all the things, and doing a tremendous amount of research. I don't conduct my own research as a clinician, but I read a lot of other research, and I like to synthesize and connect the dots, learn about things as much as I possibly can. So throughout this decade of my experience, learning from professionals, learning from other researchers, continuing to work clinically and seeing patterns in my clients' lives that are kind of looking similar to my own life, what I eventually came to realize was that I had actually been deeply lonely for decades, back to my childhood. And this morning, our keynote, Kathy, she mentioned the book, The Body Keeps the Score. And if you grow up in a home environment that is very disconnected, if there's emotional neglect, or like my house, a home marked by addiction and a deep amount of dysfunction, that those experiences of neglect, trauma, abuse, and the loneliness that comes with it, it stays with you. It stays with you. It doesn't just get resolved by going and being with more people. So you may not have experiences of addiction or divorce in your background. Some of you may, but even if you don't, I have no doubt that you have your own experiences of loneliness, being touched by loneliness. Otherwise, you likely wouldn't be here. So some of the causes of loneliness, this isn't an exhaustive list, but it's a pretty good list. See if there's anything up there that you can recognize. And we can even move in and out of these in different seasons of life, especially as our lives can be marked by grief and loss and different situations. We might have a great sense of belonging or a huge lack of belonging. So it's a vast, can anybody recognize a little bit of themselves in this list? I see nodding heads. And the truth is, it does impact everybody, because this is a feeling like any other feeling. And as I kind of go on further today, you'll learn it's not necessarily a bad feeling. However, it's one that needs to be tended to. And if we don't tend to it, it can have pretty drastic effects on our health and society as a whole, which is what we're seeing now. So a couple statistics for you, which I'm glad you're already sitting, because some of these statistics are a little bit staggering. But in the US, over 33% of adults 45 plus are lonely. Nearly 25% of adults 65 plus are isolated. And older adults, of course, are at greater risk for loneliness and isolation due to loss and illness. But the one that kind of knocked me off my chair was learning that Gen Z, which are late teens, early 20s now, are actually considered to be the loneliest generation at this point. They've been raised so differently than every generation before them. I mean, there's pros and cons, right? But their upbringing has been so heavily marked by screen time, lots and lots of screen time, which has created some deficits in social skills and also even with their interconnection. So in 2023, the US Surgeon General released an advisory on the epidemic of loneliness. Again, stay sitting. So living with loneliness impacts your health as if you were smoking 15 cigarettes per day. 15 cigarettes per day. I mean, I tried it once or twice in my teens, nearly coughed up a lung, but that's staggering. And so the impact of that, you have a nearly 30% increased risk of premature death when you live with chronic loneliness. Over 30% increased risk of stroke, nearly 30% increased risk of heart disease. And of course, you're at higher risk of developing those other mental health disorders, and even it increases your risk for physical illness as well. Because again, it's like smoking 15 cigarettes per day. So the cost, I mean, we can only sort of begin to scratch the surface on the cost of this issue. But yes, it's going to impact our personal health-related expenses. Loneliness increases older adults' risk of falling prey to financial fraud and scams when they're lonely. Loneliness costs employers over $150 billion annually due to the effects of loneliness, absenteeism, and people feeling a lack of motivation in their job. They're not going to be as productive when they're lonely. And Medicare spends over $6 billion to help older adults who are socially isolated and struggling with loneliness as well. But here's the thing. Loneliness itself is not the problem. Loneliness, like I said, it's a feeling, and it's just a hunger cue for connection. Loneliness is not bad. It's a feeling, and it is a hunger cue for connection. We are social mammals. We're wired to connect. Okay, so imagine if you're raised in an environment where every time you get a hunger cue, you're told to, stop it. That's not really real. You don't really need that, right? You're going to be living in this starvation mode. So depending on your circumstances, where you were raised or circumstances in life, if you develop the pattern of denying or ignoring or suppressing your feelings of loneliness or distracting from your feelings of loneliness, you're ignoring the hunger cue. Does that make sense? So the real problem underneath it is disconnection. Okay, this is part of why we can go be in a room with people. We can even spend time with people that we love and walk away feeling lonely. We can only feel as connected to others to the depth that we are connected to ourselves. Right? If I don't know what I'm feeling, I sure as heck am not going to be able to express how I'm feeling to you, and you're not going to be able to have as much empathy for me. Right? Deeper connection is available when we know what our feelings, wants, and needs are, when we communicate that, and we have connection with another person. So disconnection from yourself, which is internal, will lead to disconnection from others, external. So a lot of what our society is focused on, which is important because we need both. We need internal and we need external. But there's a heavy amount of focus on the external connection, getting connected to other people. But there can be a point where we can only get so much energy from others. And when we're at home by ourselves, in our room, in our bed alone, we need to have inner resources. We need to have some place to go on the inside to feel connected. So can you think of some ways that You might disconnect from yourself when you're feeling lonely or perhaps other similar unpleasant or what people might say negative emotions. Would anybody be willing to share? What are the things that you do to get away from your feelings, so to speak? Yes? Watch a lot of stuff on TV. Yep, TV's a good one to go to. Yes?
Sleep, eat to an excess.
Sleep or eat to an excess? Yes, I'm familiar with that. I go to chocolate, cookies, my screen. Oh my gosh, during my loneliest periods, I would, if I was feeling incredibly lonely, and this is not bad, but I would go and text about 10 to 15 people, because I knew if I texted that many, somebody was going to reply. You know?
I've done that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, right? We all have our ways. So, some common ways you may recognize: go into your phone, go into food, throwing yourself into your work. I'm guilty of that for sure. Substances, shopping, that's a big one. And even we can use relationships. We can end up using relationships, whether it be intimate relationships or family relationships. We can end up using them so that we feel better. I want you to make me feel a certain way. And then it's no longer really a reciprocal relationship. It can end up being very draining for one person. So the catch is, we can't solve an internal problem with an external solution. When we try to do that, what we end up doing, it may feel better in the short run. We get a quick hit of dopamine or serotonin, you know, that the dopamine, I mean, with the screens, they know how to get us, right? So it's great in the short term. You're going to get that short-term relief. But in the long run, it's still going to be there. And what I've seen a lot too is people who are incredibly socially active, and they get a lot of their needs for connection met from other people, but then something happens and they're isolated, such as due to an accident or loss of job, something like that. And they've spent most of their life being very focused externally, and now when they're kind of in a forced isolation, there's very little infrastructure on the inside to help you feel connected. So what I've been working on over the past several years, both within myself and has been incredibly successful with my clients as well, and I'm not the first to do this. I mean, this is kind of a key piece in a lot of spirituality in world religions, is cultivating interconnection. And I have seen that when connection starts from the inside out, that is where we get the deeper relationships, more fulfilling, more lasting, more meaningful, that can also sustain us in periods when we are alone. So the framework that I teach, that I've kind of developed through my experience and research, is the Heart of Interconnection. So this is my 5-part framework, and really these are 5 parts to help build your mental health toolkit. So I will do kind of a brief overview of all these 5 parts. Because of the time constraints, I can't possibly dive in to all of these, but I will try and do a deep dive into 2 of them and also give you an opportunity to learn more about the others. So the first one, higher guidance. This is really your connection to your unique, your internal source of unconditional love. For some people, that is a spiritual figure that they, maybe somebody that you've been raised with. It could be somebody that is currently living on the other side of the world. For some people, it is a grandparent that is no longer living, but really demonstrated that unconditional love for them in their life. And for some people, it's nature. So getting connected to a higher guidance is a huge piece for tapping into unconditional love that is always available to you. Embodiment. Kathy talked all about embodiment in our keynote this morning. It is about getting into your body, which helps you regulate your nervous system. It's being present where your feet are, right? Not thinking about the future or thinking about the past, but right here, right now.
Can we shut the door? Is that allowed? Just shut the door.
And then aspiration. We need to have things not only that we're looking forward to help create meaning, but aspiration also gives you a sense of what matters most to you. That helps us know it's not just about accomplishing goals, but it's more about being true to yourself, your values, and your vision for your life. Relationship to self. This is the biggest one for me. Honest, they're all kind of meaty, but this is kind of the meatiest one for me, and the one that I really focus on heavily in my counseling work is, can you imagine what it would be like if everybody had the kind of loving relationship with themselves that we want others to have with us, right? And how is that relationship currently, right? How is the self-talk? Does anybody in here have the most loving voice in their minds? I don't. It is by far the harshest and the most critical voice. I don't believe we'll ever actually be able to get rid of it. I think it's part of the human condition. However, we can learn to change our relationship with it and bring in self-compassion and connect with that loving voice of our higher guidance. And then, of course, building trust. Building trust because every loving relationship has to be built on trust, right? It can't grow, it can't really become a loving relationship if there is no trust. So we need to cultivate trust within ourselves, within our higher guidance, even sometimes reclaiming trust with your own body and breath, as well as the people around you. So because I can't dive into all 5 of these, I wanted to give you an opportunity to play with these a little bit more. On the next screen, I'm going to have a QR code. So you have got all the permission in the world right now to pull out your phone and snap a picture so that you can, if you want to, you can do a free 5-day mini course. I'll send you emails for 5 days. It's going to have a teaching, a little bit of a story from me, as well as some reflection questions and suggestions for practice for you to really engage with this material. So I'll take just a moment here, and you can go ahead and snap your picture. And if you, I don't think I have this anywhere else, so I'll take a moment here. It worked. Excellent. Ooh, and another thing that comes with it to add to your toolkit, in addition to that 5-day course, the first email you will get a list of my top 7 coping skills that I use personally and I teach my clients on a daily basis. These are my tried and true go-to coping skills. I have not developed these myself. I do not have that level of expertise, but they work. Has everyone got what they needed?
It's not going through what you.
Okay.
It says fails to validate captcha.
Okay. Well, what we can do, if you didn't get a chance to get it through this, you can see me afterwards if you would like, and I'll make sure that you get signed up for it. So first, I want to talk about higher guidance. Have you ever fallen into the trap of thinking that feeling loved and connected is entirely dependent on other people? Yes, right? I lived there for a long time. And in fact, when I started going through my own kind of healing journey and started spending a lot of time in prayer and meditation, and I still wasn't quite grasping what this meant, I had an experience of doing meditation this one morning at a meditation center I used to go to, and I was just feeling so lonely in that moment. And I just kept on looking for my teacher to arrive. And I'm like, if I could just see him just walk in the door, I would just feel so much better. And he never came, but it was such an example of how I was so focused outwardly. I was looking for somebody outside of me to bring me some sense of love and relief from my emotions in that moment. And it is a mistake to think that feeling loved and connected is entirely dependent on other people. Like I said, we need both. It's a both and kind of situation. And in fact, our brain is really kind of wired for it. So because of that, we are able to experience feelings of calm, oneness, presence through practicing internally guided prayer or affirmations. So experiencing love and connection is wired into the human brain. It's so cool. All you really need to do is activate it. And that's the hardest part, is just simply remembering to go inward to practice these things to activate it. Dr. Andrew Newberg with Thomas Jefferson University says, when prayer elicits feelings of love and compassion, there is a release of serotonin and dopamine. Both of these neurotransmitters play a role in how we behave and act. Okay, so internally guided prayer, this is using our voice. Like, yes, it can feel good and calming to listen to guided meditations, like recordings. Has anybody used those before? Guided meditations? They're lovely. They're great, especially for falling asleep or coping with anxiety. But it doesn't quite activate the brain quite the same way as using an internally guided voice. And the cool thing is, so these are the parts of the brain that are known to be activated typically when we are socially connected, and these parts have less activity when you're feeling lonely. And the cool thing is, those same parts can become activated when you positively connect internally. It's wired into the brain. And I don't know if any of you have heard this, but brain scans have shown us that our brain lights up in very similar ways as when we do something in real life versus imagining it, which is why imagining a peaceful scene is something, a skill that's often taught people in mental health to feel calm. So we can do the very same thing to help us cope with loneliness when we are alone. So some practices for higher guidance: identifying with and connecting with your internal source of unconditional love, practicing internally guided prayer, meditation, and loving self-affirmation. Like I said, I don't believe we can ever fully eliminate that critical voice in our mind, but we can heavily influence and cultivate a more loving one that comes in and can eventually take up more space. And that's thanks to neuroplasticity, which I'm sorry to introduce that topic because I'm not going into neuroplasticity today, but it's your brain's ability to change and adapt. So aspiration, that brings us to aspiration. You know, when we have that sense of love and connection, we also want to feel pulled forward. And aspiration is not about having big, lofty goals that feel forever unreachable. It's not pie in the sky type stuff. But they help you make decisions, because when we make decisions based on what matters most to us, that's what helps you feel a sense of peace and energy. So has anybody here ever made a decision based on what somebody else thought would be a good idea for you? Somebody else's preference? I see a couple yeses and a couple no's. So that's pretty good if you're able to be like so solid within yourself that that has not been the case for me. But for a lot of folks, if we fall into patterns of people pleasing, just going according to somebody else's values rather than exploring our own, it takes away our peace and it leaves us in feeling incredibly drained. So value-based activities may initially feel kind of painful. So an example for me was a few years ago, I was thinking about moving into a position professionally that the people around me really thought that I would just be a perfect fit for. And on paper, it all looked like just the right next thing to do for me. But I didn't feel a peace about it inside. It didn't line up with my vision for my family, my career future. It didn't feel right to me. So it was incredibly painful for me, lots of guilt, lots of shame, to deliver that news and feel like I was disappointing a lot of people. So it's hard. But you can either go through life being dragged by your fears or being driven by your aspirations. And that choice is yours. And we will feel more lonely if we're denying or ignoring what matters most to us, because you're disconnecting from yourself. When you reject your own values, when you reject what matters most to you, and you go according to everybody else, that's self-rejection. Dr. Stephen Hayes, who is one of the originator of acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a type of therapy that I have been practicing for years, he says, as long as you live, there will be values, qualities of actions that matter to you. And whenever you feel stuck or in a personal crisis, they can guide you towards what matters. So I've identified 3 V's of aspiration. Number 1, values, which are guiding principles that influence your perceptions, attitudes, and behaviors. Your vision, what do you want for your life, and what kind of impact do you want to have in your life? No matter what age or stage of life you are in, you can always have a vision for the kind of impact you want to have. And then, of course, vows. I tell people vows are not just for marriage or people who are ordained. We can make vows to ourselves. And vows are not guaranteed promises. Vows are guiding stars, right? They help orient you to the commitments and what matters most to you. We don't arrive at guiding stars. They just help us get where we want to go. So my question is for you is, do you know what matters most to you in this season of life? And what do you spend most of your time on? And are those 2 things in alignment? You might find that as you play around with this, if you choose to, When you are very dedicated to staying connected to your values, your visions, and your vows to yourself, there's less room for loneliness in that mix. We're more driven, it's more energizing, it feels meaningful, fulfilling, and purposeful. And that's not trying to get away from loneliness, but that is a natural result of being more connected to yourself. So we've went through a lot of information today. I'm going to do a quick review. I am right on time. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers if I have them. So we talked about the causes of loneliness, the epidemic of loneliness, the cost, the huge cost of loneliness, the problem beneath loneliness, which is disconnection, an overview of the heart of interconnection. We talked about the higher guidance, aspirations. And like I said before, loneliness isn't a problem. I see it as a call from within. And so my question for you is, how do you want to respond to that call? Thank you for your time and attention, and I'm happy to accept any questions.
Okay, who has questions? Okay, bring this up here.
Oh, just a quick question, I can just yell it. Are your slides going to be listed online on the website?
It will be, yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. I will have, my information will be available online. There's a couple items on there available as part of the resource kit. Mm-hmm.
Okay, other questions? Down here, I'll bring you the box. I'm not going to throw it to you. I could.
It could, it's like a soft toy.
Yeah.
I work with a lot of older adults doing psychotherapy, and a lot of them get stuck with the loneliness. Any extra tips? I know you talked about creating more connection. Anything else that you would add to it?
Mm-hmm. So when I have worked with older adults, I will tend to lean a little bit more on the higher guidance piece. So I have found that it's not always the case, but oftentimes people of a certain generation or culture tend to lean a little bit into they have some sense of spiritual identity, and that can be a nice area to develop it a little bit more. And that can also be an interesting area for psychotherapy, because if we have a sense of a higher power or a God, a lot of times if we grew up in an environment where we didn't have very loving parents, our sense of a higher power will take on those similar attributes. And that can be some really fruitful work for psychotherapy to kind of shift over to having a more loving relationship with that part. Mm-hmm. Others? Yes, up in the red jacket.
Down. Let's see, which row are you in? Right here. Okay. Someone might have to get up here.
Thank you.
Okay. Besides karaoke
Yeah.
and being in 2 or 3 vocal groups, which does help with connections, another thing that I do, within karaoke, and I recently, relatively recently, bought electric bikes rather than using regular ones.
Did you say electric bikes? Electric bikes?
Yes,
Oh,
bicycles.
nice.
And my first thought was, for myself, that's a way to avoid people. Because in order to get enough exercise, I need to go longer, at least twice as long as with a regular bike, and I'm able to. However, I realized that much of the time when I'm using the e-bike, which would be the same on a regular bike if I am by myself, I'm going to be singing, and I'm going to be singing songs that mean something to me, just like I do at karaoke. I don't see, that's all I wanted to say.
Nice. Well, that sounds like a lovely way for you to, have a sense of connection. You're biking, you're doing an activity that you love, and you're singing, which we learned helps to regulate our nervous system. And those are excellent resources that are responding to your needs and are meeting a need for connection. And I wanted to comment too on one thing when you said, I might be doing this to avoid people. One thing I want to say is part of the reason why this has worked so well for me is because I have a very mixed relationship with being around people. I'm an introvert, and I enjoy being around people in small bits. But I have a lot of time where I would just love for everybody to go away as well. Sometimes I just long to be on a deserted island. That wouldn't be even remotely feasible. But there are some people out there, especially people who live in rural areas, they feel lonely, but they don't necessarily want to be around people all the time. And so that's where cultivating this interconnection is also incredibly helpful for feeling a sense of solitude, versus isolation. It can turn into peaceful solitude when you're alone. Thank you.
I was going to ask a question, then pass it over.
Yeah, we're good on questions or comments or.
Well, shoot, mine's not a question per se. Anyway, thank you for one thing, taking us back to that idea. I can't remember how you described it, but the source of love, because the sort of demonstration or the examples of archetypes, parents, loving relatives, frankly, I didn't have any of those growing up. And so I did not have a conceptualization of a loving, existence, being. Yeah. And I was thoroughly atheist and super serious about it. So I was cutting myself off, frankly, from any kind of love.
Yep.
But I appreciate that you sort of revisited it, opened it up, even suggested that one might find that in a conceptualization of a higher power or God or something like that, because that's what I had to do. Mm-hmm. And it works. So I didn't even know. And this framework really puts my own experiences, things make more sense now suddenly today.
Oh, nice.
And I'll pass with that.
Thank you for sharing. I appreciate you being willing to be vulnerable, share a little bit about that experience. And it's incredibly challenging when you don't grow up with a real concept of what love is. And it's especially more confusing and challenging for folks who grow up in families that are incredibly harsh or abusive, and yet they say, I love you. That is very confusing for people. And so it is difficult to do that work and kind of come around to what does a loving relationship look like? And then how can I bring, that within me so that it's available always? Thanks. Yes.
I have the floor. Okay. I wrote this all down so I wouldn't forget. Okay, my mom is 86. Just lost my dad 6 weeks ago. And I've had this discussion with her a million times.
Yeah.
She will not reach out to other people. She wants everybody to reach out to her. And for example, people have been coming out of the woodwork, neighbors, friends, all these people.
Yeah.
And she's like, I didn't know all the, I'm surprised at all of the attention and support she's getting, but she won't reach out to other people. And I said, well, people are only going to reach out to you for so long, and you're going to say no a million times, and then they're going to give up.
Right.
And I don't know how to get that message across to her so that she'll hear what I'm saying and change her behavior. And she told me the other day that when she was young, She used to be very much an extrovert,
Yeah.
and now she's very much an introvert. And she has a therapist, but I'm at a loss as to her daughter. What do I say? What do I do?
Yeah. Yeah.
You might not have an answer in 2 seconds. But
I'm not going to have all the answers for sure, and I might have an answer that isn't necessarily what you want, but I feel for you. That is a painful situation to be in, because the truth is you can't do it for somebody else. It's the whole bringing a horse to water type thing, and it's sad, it's painful to see when you just described a perfect example of somebody who's living with disconnection within themselves and really end up isolating themselves. And for some people, you can't necessarily tell them, well, you need to do this. I need to try and get this across to you, because you will end up wearing yourself out, So the painful thing, but what I think is the more workable thing, is to actually just not try and fix her situation, is to just reflect back. You're feeling X, Y, or Z. I really hear that it sounds like this. And actually don't try to solve it at all. Don't give advice. As best as you can, just being present to it. But then the tricky part is, like most loving adult children, we will feel our own kind of angst or maybe guilt or something for not being able to solve it for them. So then our task is to try and have loving acceptance and presence to our own discomfort while we're trying to extend that for the other person.
Well, like one thing is, she wants it all from me.
Yeah. Yep. That is, you can't, it won't be sustainable for you. And that's painful. No doubt about it. Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't have the solution.
That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a hard situation.
We have time for a few more questions. Anybody has?
I will say, though, it is one of the reasons why I'm trying to teach this to as many people as possible, so that you don't find yourself in that situation later in life, is being completely without your own inner resources to help yourself, and really potentially pushing people away, because we can.
It's not just since he died. This was like a whole adult thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, very good questions. Thank you for asking them. And I have a few last-minute instructions, but first I think we need to express our thanks for our speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sherri, so very
you.
much. So just a couple of things. Make sure you fill out your green evaluation forms and turn them in at the information desk. It will make you eligible for a drawing. And then, let's see what else. The evaluation, we really pay attention to those comments. I'm on the planning committee, and we went through all the comments from last year, and they were very helpful in helping us to plan this year. So we will do that again. And then I just want to make sure you know that the closing session with Joe Davis is in the sanctuary starting at 2:40, and we'll see you there. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions and time. And again, if the QR code didn't work for anybody, you could shoot me an email, hello@sherrymherman.com. Just put course, and I'll send it to you. Thank you.